Kingdom Effect. This is episode number 7, and we're here with a longtime friend of mine, Thomas the Hunter Mitchell. Um, Thomas is the executive director at the Children's Advocacy Center. They also call it the Hope House. It's North Shore, is that right, of New Orleans?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the North Shore metropolitan area.
right. So he's been there since, 2017? Does that
Yeah,
sound about right?
that's right.
And Thomas is the director there. So when Thomas and I first met, he was a trauma therapist at the Child Advocacy Center here in Jackson, Tennessee, where I'm from, and Thomas is originally from here. And so basically, Thomas, I know you have a lot of duties right now, but back when I knew you, your primary job was to counsel and provide therapy for children who've been traumatized through either physical abuse, sexual abuse, things of that nature. So tell us kind of how you got into that field.
Yeah, so I got into the field of just psychology and scientific psychology back in 2003 when I started majoring as an undergrad at Nicholls State. But it wasn't until around 2010 when I was doing a master's level internship where I started working with trauma victims, specifically pediatric trauma victims, and developed just a passion for being able to serve kids who had experienced trauma, went on to develop PTSD with evidence-based treatments to alleviate what they were experiencing. I remember very specifically, I was working at Lafourche Parish Juvenile Justice Center, which was a detention and group home and shelter for kids in Lafourche Parish in Louisiana, south of New Orleans. A lot of people don't think there's south of New Orleans, but there is. It's remote and really rural. But I remember vividly, we had this kiddo come into the shelter who had been transported just by police, and she was a sexual assault victim, and she was 14 or 15, and really no one there at that facility, the professionals, knew how to remedy what she was experiencing. She was experiencing acute distress, and having, I'm not going to go into the exact symptoms, but she wasn't speaking, she wasn't sleeping, she was not able to go to the bathroom. She was really in a very a dissociated state, where she couldn't be herself and be able to even describe what had happened to her at that time. And that kind of led me into this field, man. I knew that whenever I graduated with my master's, I wanted to do something to be able to figure out, hey, how can I help that child in that situation?
Yeah, I remember probably one of the coolest stories, or maybe that's the wrong terminology to use, but just one of the cases that you and I worked together that kind of stand out in my mind was the child that had been abused, and the perpetrator was wearing a mask when it happened. And then a lot of people don't know this, Kevin. I don't even think you know this. I was a dog handler and had a therapy dog that we used at work with working with children that had been abused. And Thomas, Thomas calls me one day and says, "Hey, can I borrow Pacey for a couple of days for this therapy?" And I'm like, "Sure, man." And I just told him the command, to go outside and poop. That was it. That was the main one to know. But Thomas, I'll let you tell kind of how that child got from point A to point B through the type of therapy that you were doing with the dog.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, that was a very unique and a special story. And there's so many special stories, man. Where I work now, I'm the director of CAC Hope House, like Glenn said, serving the North Shore, and we serve 350 child abuse victims, a
Wow.
year. That's not parents. That's strictly kids age 2 to 17 who have been victims of physical abuse, sexual abuse, child pornography, child trafficking. One noteworthy stat is, and I'm big into statistics, but this year we served 45 child trafficking victims, which is up nearly threefold from 2020. But yeah, all of those kids, all 350 of those kids have such unique stories, unique circumstances, and most importantly, unique needs. They all have very, very unique needs, and it's our jobs as professionals to figure out how to meet those needs and place them back on a trajectory of just being kids again. But yeah, if you want to get into that now, Glenn, we can, or we
Yeah.
could, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a cool story. I think in my mind, it's the one that I always recall as the best illustration of kind of, I don't know the right words for it, but desensitizing those triggers that cause the effects of the PTSD and the trauma. I think that's a really good example that our listeners will understand.
Yeah, yeah. So that child is doing great now. That was around 2015. I was working at the Carl Perkins Center. You were obviously an investigator um, at MDT, and you were an investigator with JPD, and you had Pacey, which for those of you who don't know, Pacey is this incredible therapy dog, and helped many kids just feel calm and relaxed. Pacey is a gentle, golden lab who just sits around and just loves to be loved. So very cool asset to have at the CAC. But we had a child referred to us. She was actually sexually assaulted. She was 6 years old at the time in 2015. She was sexually assaulted by an adult male perpetrator at a home in Middle Tennessee. And her siblings were all placed in foster care based on that experience and multiple other experiences. So the foster parent happened to be in West Tennessee, in that rural county of West Tennessee. And we received a referral that said, hey, this 6-year-old girl, we called her Ashley. That's not her real name, but 6-year-old Ashley has severe challenges at school. She's not going to the bathroom at school. She's having incontinence. She's so deathly afraid of every male in the school system, and she's having panic attacks, deep anxiety, nightmares at night. She's not able to receive affection through hugs or touch or anything like that. So it was one of those hallmark PTSD pediatric cases that we received, which is pretty normal for us as clinicians. We had a clinical team of 15 therapists all across West Tennessee, and pretty normal stuff and stuff that we treat every day. What wasn't normal is when we got into the case and we started really working with Ashley, we started having these cues, right? So things that are associated with the trauma that we never we don't typically see in every case. So with Ashley's, hers, we heard from the teachers at school. Ashley would ask the teacher in first grade, hey, is there a man with a mask on outside of the room that's going to hurt me? Her mom said that she was having severe nightmares about masks, really, really worried and concerned about masks. She wouldn't go to school at all during Halloween time. She was deathly afraid of going to Walmart during Halloween. So all of that led us to investigate more. I'm getting a little feedback, Glenn, on like in my earphones.
Yeah, I can hear it too, Thomas. I think it might just be here. I don't think that'll come through on the clean version.
All right, cool. So yeah, you can still hear me fine and everything, right? Okay, cool. So Ashley, is 6-year-old girl. A fellow clinician of mine, Chase Sanders, and I were looking at the case, investigating how to meet her needs, and this theme of mask continued to come up, and how deathly afraid of masks she was, on top of all of the other PTSD symptoms. And it was really inhibiting her from being able to experience life. Like, I mean, imagine A true phobia is a preoccupation and an obsession with a fear associated with a stimulus. So no school during Halloween, panic attacks at Walmart when she would see the Halloween aisle. She even associated April Fool's Day to being affiliated with masks somehow. So she was afraid of April Fool's Day, that somehow that would be associated with mask in her mind. Nightmares about mask. All of these symptoms, and we found out that her perpetrator, who was I think 19 years old, it was a person in the neighborhood. He wore a scream mask whenever he abused her, and that was in order to hide his identity. Well, the child had associated the mask as the causal relationship that caused her trauma or hurt her. Therefore, she had generalized with stimulus generalization, all masks are dangerous, scary, and are gonna hurt me. Um, so so yeah, do y'all have any questions so far in the story?
Yeah, I think it'd be really great for people like me who it seems like the word trauma is just being used more and more these days. You know, you just hear it, and it may be just the people I'm talking to. I hear it more, but can you like define trauma for in layman's terms?
Yeah. So trauma is anytime a person experiences a life-threatening event, experience, stimulus, or an event that causes, uh, tremendous, it could cause damage, it could cause harm, it could cause emotional pain. It's really any experience that can result in emotional, physical, or life threatening injury. And that's the first criterion of post traumatic stress disorder. There has to be an experience that results in significant fear and challenges. So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's what trauma is.
yeah, and what I think is important for our listeners to hear, Thomas, is not only this epidemic of child abuse and child sexual abuse and children experiencing trauma, and the great work that you do at Hope House and other people like you do across the nation. But one of the things that I wanted our listeners to know, especially because we have a lot of our audience is people that um, are either involved in a nonprofit or they're thinking about getting involved with a nonprofit where they're going to deal with people that are traumatized. We have nonprofits that we're associated with that rescue children who have been trafficked and abused. We have a nonprofit that we had on the show last week that is an alternative to the foster care system. Of course, they deal with the trauma that the children have experienced that's put them in that position. We've got another nonprofit that goes into strip clubs and talks to the ladies that work there. So one of the things that I know was always something you and I talked about almost on a daily basis was that we as in the workers experience trauma through us helping these people that we help. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's called vicarious trauma. Experiencing another's trauma through them, through stories, through pictures, through whatever. So talk a little bit about that and how that has this work has affected you personally, and then to include maybe how it has affected your relationships. I talk about that in some previous episodes myself, but I think it's important for people to hear that and then kind of talk about some ways that we can kind of safeguard ourselves. Those of us that are in this line of work, we can safeguard ourselves and keep an eye on one another, and recognize some of the signs that maybe it's time to take a break, for a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, man. Well, I mean, vicarious trauma is very real, and it certainly is something within this field that we have to, monitor and keep track of. We actually have protocols and policies in place, but as I mentioned to Kevin, that, trauma is an experience, right? That threatens our life or our emotional safety or our physical safety, and just our general sense of being safe in the world. Well, exposure to others who have experienced trauma also, even though that's not a direct, experience, it's a secondary experience. So if I'm listening, if I'm processing all day about, these tragedies that have occurred and that people have incurred in their life, I'm exposed to that trauma in the same way, and it can certainly have a profound impact. I mean, Buckley, you and I have seen people in this field, whether it's law enforcement or DCFS, which is DCS in Tennessee, or CAC work, that they start at 25 and they're drinking every day at 30, or they're divorced 3 or 4 times and they can't maintain a stable relationship, or they really go on to develop challenges if they're not monitoring themselves and taking care of themselves. What do you do to take care of yourself?
Well, back in the day, of course, I was lucky to have someone like you that was a coworker and a neighbor and a friend. I consider us more than just coworkers. But then we also took certain steps at the office. If our normal workday was 8 to 4, we stopped investigating at 3, and we did something for that last hour, whether it was play Call of Duty or go fishing or go to the weight room, whatever that was for you. But an hour prior to going home, we quit doing that. And it was super helpful. Looking back, I know that it was super preventative, but it didn't prevent everything. And of course, the effects of vicarious trauma kind of sneak up on you. Others around you see it before you do. And matter of fact, you're kind of, I can remember just kind of being in this state of denial. No, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me. I just had a bad day or whatever. But I was telling, I hope you don't mind me telling this, but I was telling Kevin before that I can remember getting phone calls from you in the middle of the night and vice versa. And I remember, hey man, I just had a bad dream. It's associated with this case I'm working. And I think that was the big thing for me. The big saving grace for me was having someone like you that understood what vicarious trauma was and understood that it's okay. Number one, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to say, man, I've had enough. I got to call time out. I got to take a few weeks off, a few months off, and go do something else. And I think a lot of people still view mental health as a sign of weakness, or man, something's wrong with me. I'm sick. Or I don't think people still in society view mental health as staying involved in that and staying in check with that is a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And what you really touched on in that is that support system. And that is the number one, to me, factor of resilience amongst peers that do this work. And, I work with 9 other professionals in this building that range from, high school diploma to a Juris Doctorate. And they're incredible professionals that are dedicated for each child. And at the end of the day, it's so important for us to know that we all are a team and we all have each other's back, and we all trust each other. And there is that camaraderie of this case really got to me. I mean, we see some tough cases, and being able to just have that support system is incredible, man. And unfortunately, it's not like that at all CACs, and it took us a while to get to that place as well. But that's the number one thing, and just mindfulness and monitoring yourself. I was working, even though I'm a director here, I was doing clinical therapy in Bogalusa because we were short-staffed at our satellite center. And I remember on the way home about a year and a half ago, I'd worked this really, really tough case, a 17-year-old who experienced severe, forced, sexual assault that was really traumatizing. And I worked with her on the trauma narration, which is the processing of that event, because that's what we know in trauma work, is that avoidance of the event and not talking about it is far worse than approaching it and being able to process it in a healthy way and alleviate some of those cognitive distortions that develop. But I remember I was listening to the radio, like any ride home, listening to Alt J or whatever it was. And I remember looking at the steering wheel and just seeing white knuckles, like just driving home. And I wasn't even conscious of it. I was sitting there driving 55, to 55, but my knuckles, my entire body was just so tense and my shoulders were just completely tense. And I remember looking at that and being like, wow, like 30 minutes ago, I was processing this trauma. If you had asked me cognitively if I was in a stressful state, probably not, but my body certainly was. Physically, I was in a very stressful state. And that's why it's just so important to have that transition after your exposure, to be able to get into your other state. One of the things I do every night is, before I leave work, we have a doormat, and I make a physical representation of me brushing off my feet at the door before I go home.
Yeah. I think I remember you calling me that night. You were driving home, the story you were just telling. And, that's one of the things that, like you said, is so important, is having that person that, I couldn't give you any clinical advice, at that point, but you know what I could do? I could listen, and say, brother, man, I hate it. I've been there. I know it sucks. I'm here. If you need to call me again at 2 a.m, so I think it can also have an effect on our other relationships. I know you mentioned before, being divorced multiple times, and man, I remember a time I couldn't go to sleep unless I took an Ambien or drank a fifth of whiskey. I just could not turn my brain off, and couldn't eat. I mean, everything was jacked up. But I just remember that causing so much damage in my relationships, because another common side effect is being reclusive, right? So coming home, you said you dusted your feet off. But I would come home and I'm like, man, I don't want to talk to anybody. Like, I just want to watch, TV and zone out. And, God forbid my wife asked me how my day went, so that's super important. And I remember you and I had a conversation about this, and I'll never forget the advice you gave me. Do you remember?
I don't.
You told me, you said, when you come home, have a conversation with your wife. And when you come home, for the first 30 minutes, that's your time to do whatever. Go upstairs, play PlayStation, just chill and relax. And then when that 30 minutes is over, then you come out and engage with the rest of the family. And that was some of the best advice I think you ever gave to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool, man. That's a great technique, as well as just the importance of that transition, and to not carry over. And even as a law enforcement officer, people don't realize how these investigators are on call sometimes. So that's very difficult for them to do, in being on call and having that chronic state of kind of hypervigilance, all the time. But some of the cool things that we do here at the Children's Advocacy Center for all of our staff is we pay for our staff to receive therapy, right? So that's a big important variable for us, is to provide completely free of charge clinical therapy that is at their choosing. We're not telling them who to go see, where to go see it. We offer that resource to them because we know the effects. And several of our staff, the majority, take us up on it and submit their receipts, and we reimburse them, no questions asked. Other things we do, we have a monthly vicarious trauma yoga group that's focused on mindfulness and meditation. And Other factors include to really be able to offer greater support and resources is just time, like you said, like not like having that traditional like 9 to 5 structure, and forcing people to work 60 hours a week or whatever. We're pretty flexible with scheduling and encourage time with family.
It's good. I was curious as you were talking, I was just thinking about a couple questions. One, is there a difference in trauma in a child versus an adult? And then also, like, I know you talked about the dramatic signs that you saw in that one particular girl, but what are some signs that, like, for example, my wife teaches Sunday school and has a lot of interaction with, third and fourth graders. Are there signs that you can look for of kids that have been through trauma?
Yeah, certainly, and trauma is all kind of relative, right? There's so much variance, and we all have trauma. We all, if you're a human alive and you haven't been exposed to trauma, and you're over the age of 7 or 8, it's pretty hard to find. Most kids, adolescents, adults have experienced some form of trauma. It's really how your body and your mind interpret, and how that trauma affects you. As far as differentiation between post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the diagnosis for a clinical trauma experience that results in clinical changes to the person, there really isn't a lot of differentiation between pediatric cases and adult cases. Trauma typically affects children, adults, humans the same way. You have a experience of a threatening stimulus and a threatening experience, and as a result of that, there's behavioral changes. There's cognitive changes. There is really, in a nutshell, the lack of feeling safe, and that's what post-traumatic stress disorder is: the lack of feeling emotionally safe, physically safe. As far as symptoms, that's also a wide array. I think a heightened state of anxiety, hypervigilance, the like textbook diagnosis of the diagnostic criteria. You're looking at hypervigilance, a chronic state of being on guard. You're looking at sleeplessness, restlessness. You're looking at nightmares. Re-experiencing is one of those criterions. So that's flashbacks, dissociation, that sort of thing. Heightened anxiety, intrusive thoughts. So I'm having these thoughts come into my mind about masks when I don't want them to, or I'm thinking about, all men are going to hurt me, all women are going to hurt me, and a chronic state of being in fear, fight, flight, or freeze from the amygdala.
Yeah. What do you think, like, just culturally, I don't know if this relates or not, but what impact has just the last 2 years had on particularly children? Have you seen any behavioral changes from children just from the last 2 years of COVID and all we've been through?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Kevin, and the jury's still out on the long-term effects of COVID. It's certainly, one of the statistics that I heard the other day is there are, and I hope that I remembered this correctly, 160,000 kids in the United States of America who have lost a parent due to COVID.
Wow. I ask you that because it's real for me. Like, I have an 11-year-old, 10-year-old girl that has always just been precious and sweet and fun to be around. And she went through multiple things. Like, we moved to a different city, a different state, and she lost a pet that she deeply loved. And then following that was the whole COVID thing. And man, she is just a different person, like just huge behavioral changes in how she relates to people. and we've been trying to pinpoint it for a little while. And really, I think she soaks up what people think about her and how they react to her. That's pretty normal for her. And I think, just going to school with masks and not seeing people's smiles and interactions with her, not even knowing if tomorrow she's going to be in school, it just seems to have had a really negative impact on her.
Yeah, there's a variety of challenges that our kids are experiencing right now, and it's certainly traumatizing. I mean, the pandemic and the stress that the parents are encountering is causing secondary trauma for the kids. And I mentioned, I mean, those your child, that could be absolutely distress caused by experiencing the trauma of the pandemic and whatever she's experiencing with that. It's challenging to pinpoint, but I definitely think that there's going to be profound effects of this, which there already are. And I mentioned those 160,000 kids who have possible traumatic grief as a result of the loss of a loved one. So it's a challenging time for sure.
Thomas,
but one of the things I want to say real quick though, before Glenn, is that look at it like a cliff, right? So like we all experience trauma. This is an analogy I give in presentations. Think about like a cliff that is going to be a free fall into the Grand Canyon. And that free fall is going to be a fall to post-traumatic stress, which is clinically observable, measurable, diagnostic problems as a result of trauma. Mm-hmm. Some of us start out life way at the edge. I'm going to do a rudimentary drawing here, but if this is the cliff, okay, and this is the free fall down to the abyss of PTSD. Some of us start out right over here, which is like we're born and we have not anywhere close to the cliff. And then, we might experience one trauma and it edges us a little bit closer. We might experience another trauma, a car wreck or a hurricane, moves us a little bit closer. And then, we're still not falling off though, that cliff into PTSD. Some of us start out right here, right? So because of epigenetics, because of sociocultural factors, because of challenges with child rearing, some of us start right here. So it's just that one nudge that moves us all the way down and drops us into PTSD. So that's why there's just so much variance. It really depends on the predisposition that the person goes into the situation with.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. We've got just a few more minutes left, Thomas, and I wanted to ask you a question. When you and I first met, you did not have any children, but now you do. You're a father of 3, 2 twin girls and a boy. And how has that affected your work? Like, how do the cases, are they more intense for you now, knowing that you have children that are in that same age bracket that you service at the Hope Center?
Yeah, that's a great question, Glenn. And it definitely, I mean, that's a unique transition in itself from doing trauma work pre having kids and then post having kids. I try to stay on top of myself now, but and make sure I'm taking care of myself so that I can be the best dad I can be first, and then the best clinician I can be, second. I have identical twin girls. They're 5 years old, and we have this wall at the CAC Hope House that's really cool. It's kids. They actually put their handprint on the wall whenever they graduate from therapy, and they no longer have trauma diagnosis. They are really back to being kids again. And I saw 2 7-year-old identical twin girls walk up to the wall about a month ago and both put their handprints, identical, handprints. And that kind of set me back for a moment because it just hit home so much being a dad of two twin girls. But at the end of the day, I mean, man, I'm so proud of those girls. I don't even know them. I know they're a clinician very well, but I'm so proud of them and proud of graduating therapy and just being able to be kids again, and happy to be a part of this little system that, you know, look at it like we're like guides in their boat, right? These kids come to us. They're about to hit the Ocoee River, for a Tennessee reference, going upstream in Whitewater Rapids, and it's hard work and it's challenging. And we're their, you know, guide. And they get to the end of the river and they're safe and they're sound and they're able to just be kids again and worry about kid stuff instead of, you know, it goes from, is my perpetrator Mike gonna kill my dad because I told, like, he told me he would kill my dad if I ever told anybody, and I told people because I'm so brave. It goes from worrying about that to worrying about, is Johnny gonna ask me to the prom dance this year, which is what they should be worried about, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I remember we've had this conversation a couple of times, even on the podcast. But you know, when we talk with Buckley about, you know, what being in his line of work over the years has cost him, and then when I ask why he does it, you know, his general response is if it were my girls or if it were my kids that were in that situation, would I want someone else to help? So I don't know if you have any like just last minute thoughts about why you do what you do, but that's just always stuck with me about what Buckley shared with us.
Yeah, that's a good thing that Buckley said. The main thing I think is just being a part of something bigger than yourself, and that's what motivates us. It's hard work, and you know we have a huge budget every year that we have to fill, and we go and ask people for money to help us, and we try to convey to them that what they're doing is an investment. It's a monetary investment in what we do. We're making a physical, you know, work investment. The children are making the biggest investment in investing in, you know, their outcomes in their lives. But I don't know, man. I got a Christmas card here from a child I worked with like 7 years ago, her and her family, and I didn't even think they would remember me. And that just kind of like made me so appreciative of that experience, that one experience, to be able to work with that child, and the fact that I was able to play a small role as a witness in her getting better. And that's something that'll just kind of stick with me for the rest of my life. And one thing about a CAC that's unique is that every single child is exactly the same. So you could be a mom of 5 children and you work at McDonald's, and you're on Medicaid, and you get the same level of care as a senior pediatrician at the local hospital that has 3 kids or 4 kids or 5 kids here at the CAC. So it's all the same. Like, every child is revered and their recovery is revered, and we love playing a small part in seeing them whole.
That's awesome, man. Thomas, I know that you guys are funded by a grant and also donations. And so what are some other ways that people can get involved to help support CACs in their community?
Yeah, so I think there's around like 750 of us across the nation. We are completely independent nonprofits, most of us. You can go to the National Children's Alliance.org and look up the nationwide network that we belong to. And you can find your local CAC and reach out, ask to volunteer. You know, we give teddy bears to every single child that comes to our CAC. You know, something simple, do a teddy bear drive. You know, encourage others to take Stewards of Children, which is darkness to light training for adults to become equipped with prevention skills, which is completely free. There's so many ways to get involved. Financially is one, but that's only a small way. You can do a variety of other things.
Good deal, man. Guys, if you want to check out the Hope House on the North Shore of New Orleans, the website is down here on the screen under Kevin, cachhopehouse.org. You can get on there and learn more about what they do there in the New Orleans area, but also, as Thomas said, get on and find your local CAC and see how you can dive in and help. Thomas, man, thanks so much for being here tonight, man. It's good to see you, brother. I missed you not being 2 houses down. But we do have some good times when I come down to New Orleans. Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure, being on y'all's podcast, and best of luck to you. It's nice to meet you, Kevin. And I hope that this thing really takes off and y'all are able to really reach, the community and let people know what's going on.
Good deal, man. Tell the wife and kids I said, hey.
I sure will. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to send you a razor and some shaving cream, okay, in the mail. You'll be looking for it soon, all right?
I'm going to send you some beard growth.
Yeah, I need some. I need some. Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks for listening to The Kingdom Effect with Thomas the Hunter Mitchell.